Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've had dogs my whole life. My parents made sure I understood that owning a dog wasn't just about cuddles and playtime, it was about responsibility. When I got my own place, I knew exactly what I was getting into when I adopted my 3 dogs. I spent months working with each of them on obedience training. Early mornings at the park, evenings practicing commands, weekends with a professional trainer. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to be the kind of owner who didn't let their pets become someone else's problem. My neighbors moved in about a year ago with their 3 dogs. The first time they saw mine sitting calmly in the yard, responding to commands, they seemed impressed. Then I noticed something shift. Their dogs were a mess, constantly barking, lunging at the fence, completely uncontrolled. And instead of working on it, they started making excuses. One afternoon I was outside with my dogs when one of theirs started going crazy at the fence. I called mine inside immediately because that's what you do. The husband came out and waved me off, telling me not to do that and insisting that the dogs were just being dogs and doing their job. I just nodded and went inside. But I knew what he was really saying. He didn't want to feel bad about his own dogs being out of control. My yard has a vinyl picket fence that cost me $8,000 to install. When they moved in, they built their fence using mine as the fourth wall. I didn't mind at first. It made sense financially for them. But then one of their dogs started repeatedly throwing itself at my fence, trying to get through to attack mine. I could see the fence panels starting to bow from the impact. I didn't want conflict, so I took matters into my own hands. I installed privacy backing on my side of the fence and planted 15 boxwood shrubs along the property line. That cost me another $1,000. Not to mention the entire weekend I spent digging holes and planting. I figured if their dog couldn't see mine, it would calm down. The husband saw me working and came over. He told me with a smirk that it wasn't going to work because the dogs would still hear each other. And he was right. After spending all that money and effort, their dog was still attacking the fence. I could hear the panels cracking, so I sent them a text. I spent an hour writing it, making sure it was polite and reasonable. I explained my concerns about the fence breaking, offered some solutions like keeping their dog away from that section of the yard, and said I wanted to keep things friendly between us. The response I got back was insane. They immediately played the victim and blamed my dogs for somehow provoking theirs. Then the wife started sending me these unhinged texts, saying that my message had ruined her entire week and asking if I had any idea how stressful this was for them. She said I owed her an apology. I was asking them to control their dog that was destroying my property, and somehow I owed her an apology. Eventually, they put up a 6-foot privacy fence attached to mine. It was a legal height according to town ordinances, but at that point they clearly hated me and I preferred not seeing them anyway, so I didn't report it. They started letting their dogs run loose in the unfenced parts of their yard. Then I started seeing them in my garden and running around in the street where people walk their kids and other dogs constantly. I installed security cameras. Best decision I ever made, but the footage was worse than I thought. Their aggressive dog was still trying to break through the fence. Their other 2 were running through my garden, destroying plants I'd spent years cultivating, and all 3 were running loose in the street at least twice a day. One evening I was bringing my dogs in and their aggressive dog came charging across the yard, snarling and snapping. My dogs were on leashes, completely controlled. I yelled at their dog to go home. The wife came storming out and screamed at me, saying that maybe if my dogs weren't out there all the time, hers wouldn't react. I pointed out that her dog was off-leash and attacking mine while mine were on leashes in my own yard. She told me to screw off and called me a self-righteous jerk. That was it. I called the police and sent them every video I had. The officer who came out was professional and thorough. He watched the footage and shook his head, saying this was a safety issue. He told me to keep sending clips every time it happened, and he would find them every single time. He mentioned that the lieutenant was concerned after seeing the videos, especially the ones of their dogs running loose in the street. When they found out I'd involved the police, the wife lost it. She started screaming at me from her yard, calling me every name in the book. I just went inside and made sure my cameras caught all of it. Then tonight, I caught something new on camera. They were walking one of their dogs in the wildlife refuge across the street. The dog stopped and pooped right on the trail. They looked around, then just walked away. Our neighborhood has an online group where people constantly complain about dog poop all over the refuge and the sidewalks. Mystery poop, they call it. Well, mystery solved. I sent the video to our community leader. He's a retired guy who takes neighborhood stuff seriously. He told me to post it publicly and to email it to every resident because people needed to know. So I did exactly that. I posted the video with a simple caption explaining what they'd done and how their dogs had been running loose and acting aggressive for months. The response was immediate. Comment after comment rolled in. One person wrote that they'd stopped walking on our block because they felt unsafe. Another said they'd always wondered who was leaving poop everywhere. Someone else mentioned seeing their dogs loose multiple times and being too nervous to say anything. The community leader went over to their house to confront them. I watched from my window as he stood on their porch, clearly not mincing words. Later he told me he was bringing it up with the police too, that there was power in numbers. That evening I sat on my porch with my dogs lying calmly beside me. Across the street I could see the lights on in their house. I imagined them reading the comments, dealing with the community leader's visit, knowing that everyone in the neighborhood now knew exactly what kind of neighbors they were. I've been planning this Japan trip for months now. Every hotel, every train ticket, every single restaurant reservation. My husband didn't want to help, which I understood. The idea of getting on a plane for 12 hours straight was eating him alive, so I took care of everything. I figured that was the least I could do since this was supposed to be our honeymoon, and our first anniversary celebration rolled into one. We got married a year ago in a small ceremony. Nothing fancy, just close family and friends. We'd talked about taking a honeymoon right after the wedding, but money was tight and we both had work commitments we couldn't get out of. So we waited, saved up, planned for something bigger. Japan had always been on my bucket list, and he'd always said he wanted to go too, back when flying was just an abstract concept and not something he actually had to do. 2 days before our flight, we had the argument. I was double-checking our bags in the living room, making sure we had our passports, our printed hotel confirmations, everything we'd need. Our flight out of LAX was scheduled for 11:30 in the morning. I told him we should leave the house by 6 so we'd get to the airport by 7:30. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind and said 7:30 was way too early since our flight wasn't until 11:30. I explained that I wanted us there 4 hours early. He called it insane and said we'd be sitting there forever. I reminded him it was an international flight and you're supposed to get there early. He shot back that 2 hours was early and he wasn't going to sit in an airport for 4 hours before getting on a plane. He asked if I knew what that would do to him. I stopped folding the jacket I was holding and looked at him. He was pacing near the couch, that familiar tightness in his jaw that meant his anxiety was ramping up. I said it was better than missing the flight. He insisted we weren't going to miss the flight and that LAX wasn't that far. I pointed out it was an hour and a half away on a good day, and the weather report was calling for possible storms. Plus, there was all that chaos with the government shut down and security lines could be insane. He suggested we leave at 8 and get there at 9:30, which would still be 2 hours. I told him 2 hours wasn't enough. He said it was plenty and people did it all the time. I countered that people also missed flights all the time. He stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. He asked if I cared about how he was feeling at all. That stung. I'd spent months planning every detail of this trip. I'd researched anti-anxiety techniques for flying. I'd booked an aisle seat for him so he wouldn't feel trapped. I'd packed his favorite snacks and downloaded movies he liked onto my tablet. I told him that wasn't fair. He asked if it wasn't, then went on about how I knew his anxiety was bad about this flight. I knew sitting in that airport watching the clock would make it worse, but I didn't care because I was worried about traffic. I said I was worried about us missing our honeymoon because we cut it too close. He called me selfish. I felt my chest get tight. We'd barely fought during our entire first year of marriage, and now here we were, 2 days before the trip of a lifetime, calling each other selfish. I reminded him that I'd planned this entire trip, every single piece of it, and now he was calling me selfish because I wanted to make sure we actually got there. He said he never asked me to plan everything. I pointed out he couldn't even think about it without panicking, so someone had to do it. He accused me of throwing that in his face now. I said I wasn't, just that maybe I knew what I was doing here since I'd flown internationally before, and he hadn't. He asked if that meant I got to decide everything. I said yes when it came to not missing our flight. We didn't talk much for the rest of that day. He went to bed early. I stayed up late refreshing the weather forecast and looking at traffic patterns for LAX during morning hours. Everything I saw made me more convinced that 4 hours was the right call. The next day, the day before our flight, he brought it up again at breakfast. He said he'd been thinking and suggested we compromise by leaving at 7 to get there at 8:30. I said that was only 3 hours. He pointed out it was more than 2. I insisted it wasn't enough. He said that for me, nothing was enough, and I'd probably want to camp out at the airport overnight if I could. I asked what this was really about. He said from where he was sitting, it looked like I cared more about being right than about how he was feeling. I told him that from where I was sitting, it looked like he was willing to risk our entire trip because he didn't want to deal with his anxiety. He just said, "Wow." I tried to backtrack and said, "I didn't mean it like that." He said, "Yes, I did." He left the room. I heard him on the phone with his brother later, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I could guess. That evening, I was in our bedroom finishing up the packing when he came in. He sat down on the edge of the bed and didn't say anything for a minute. He told me his brother thought he was being unreasonable. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say. He explained that he'd talked to his brother about this and his mom and 2 of his co-workers. I asked what they all said. He said they all told him the same thing, that he was being difficult, that 4 hours wasn't that crazy for an international flight, that he should just take some anti-anxiety medication and deal with it. I sat down next to him on the bed and said I wasn't trying to make this harder for him. He said he knew and apologized for calling me selfish. I was the opposite of selfish. I'd done everything for this trip. I told him I wanted it to be good for both of us. He agreed, which was why he was telling me right then that we were leaving at 6. We'd get there at 7:30, and he'd find a way to manage his anxiety for those 4 hours. I asked if he was sure. He said no, but he was sure that I was right about this, and he was sure he didn't want to ruin our honeymoon by being stubborn. We left at 6 the next morning, hit traffic near downtown LA that added 30 minutes to our drive, got to the airport at 8. Security line was wrapped around the building because of new procedures related to the government shutdown. Took us an hour and 45 minutes to get through. We grabbed breakfast and made it to our gate with exactly 35 minutes to spare before boarding. My husband looked at me when we sat down at the gate and told me not to say it. I promised I wasn't going to say anything. He said I was thinking it though. I admitted maybe a little. He almost smiled and thanked me for being stubborn about this. I thanked him for listening. We got on that plane to Japan with time to spare. My husband passed away years ago. I had to figure out how to be both parents to our little girl. She was only 11 then, barely old enough to understand why her dad wasn't coming home anymore. We learned to lean on each other through the grief, through the financial struggles, through everything that came after. Then last year, right after her 14th birthday, my daughter started complaining about pain in her leg. At first, I thought it was just growing pains. She'd always been active, always running around with her friends. But the pain got worse. She started limping. I took her to the doctor, thinking maybe she'd pulled a muscle or sprained something without realizing it. The diagnosis hit me like a freight train. Osteosarcoma, bone cancer. My baby girl had cancer. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and watching my daughter go through things no kid should ever have to experience. The chemotherapy started almost immediately. She handled it better than I did, honestly. When her hair started falling out in clumps, she cried for one night, then asked me to help her shave the rest off the next morning. She said she'd rather take control of it than watch it abandon her piece by piece. That was 3 months ago. Now we were in what the doctors called a maintenance phase. She still had treatments, still had appointments, but she was stable, strong even. She wanted to get back to doing normal things. So when she asked if we could take the subway into the city to visit the bookstore she loved, I said yes. The subway car wasn't too crowded that afternoon. We found seats near the middle, and my daughter pulled out her phone to show me something funny her friend had sent her. She was wearing her favorite hoodie and a beanie that covered her bald head. She usually kept the beanie on in public, not because she was ashamed, she'd tell me, but because people stared less. It was warm in the subway car though, and after a few minutes she pulled the beanie off and stuffed it in her pocket. Her bald head was slightly pale where the sun didn't reach, and you could see the faint outline of where her hair used to frame her face. That's when the woman got on. She stumbled into the car at the next stop clearly drunk, beer bottle in hand, makeup smeared, yelling something at nobody in particular. Most people looked away or buried themselves in their phones. I pulled my daughter a little closer, hoping the woman would just find a seat and leave everyone alone. No such luck. The drunk woman's eyes locked onto my daughter. She weaved through the aisle and stopped right in front of us, swaying slightly. She demanded to know what was wrong with my daughter in a loud, aggressive voice. My daughter looked up at her, confused, and asked what she meant. The drunk woman went on a rant about how girls were supposed to have hair. Long, beautiful hair. Not shave it all off like some thug or skinhead. She asked if my daughter was trying to be tough, if she thought she was cool looking like that. My daughter tensed beside me. I put my hand on her arm and tried to explain that my daughter had cancer, that she was going through chemotherapy, and asked the woman to please leave us alone. The woman laughed. She said, "Sure, cancer? What a good excuse." She'd heard it all now. She claimed we would say anything to justify looking like freaks. My daughter's jaw tightened. I could see her struggling between staying quiet and defending herself. She chose the latter. She told the woman that she didn't know anything about her, that she didn't choose to lose her hair, that she didn't choose to spend her 14th year getting pumped full of poison hoping it would kill the cancer before it killed her. But the woman, she said, had chosen to get drunk, had chosen to stumble onto this subway and harass strangers. At least the state my daughter was in wasn't her fault. Before I could react, she hurled her beer bottle straight at my daughter's head. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the bottle spinning through the air. My daughter flinched back and the bottle sailed past her, missing by inches, and shattered against the wall behind us. Everything happened fast after that. 3 men who'd been sitting nearby jumped up and grabbed the drunk woman before she could do anything else. She started screaming and trying to fight them off, but they held her without hurting her. One of the men, wearing a gray jacket, told someone to get the conductor. He said they were holding her until the next station. An older woman came over and kneeled in front of my daughter. She asked if my daughter was okay, if any of the glass had hit her. My daughter shook her head, and I checked her over anyway, my hands trembling. The subway pulled into the next station within 2 minutes. The men held the drunk woman near the doors while another passenger ran out onto the platform looking for police or security. It didn't take long. 2 transit officers appeared, and the passengers quickly explained what happened. The officers took one look at the broken glass, at my daughter's bald head and pale face, and at the drunk woman still trying to yell insults, and they pulled out their handcuffs. They told her she was under arrest for assault. The drunk woman started screaming louder, fighting against the handcuffs, calling everyone every name in the book. The officers weren't gentle as they hauled her off the train. We could hear her voice echoing through the station even after the doors closed. The older woman was still kneeling by my daughter. She told her she was very brave, both for what she said and for what she was going through. Other passengers nodded in agreement. A younger guy offered my daughter his unopened water bottle. Someone else asked if we needed anything, if we wanted them to call someone. The man in the gray jacket stayed with us until we got off at our stop just to make sure we were okay. My daughter held it together until we got outside. Then she buried her face in my shoulder and cried. Not because of the drunk woman, she said, but because of everyone else. Because people cared. We still made it to the bookstore that day. My daughter picked out 3 new books, and I didn't say a word about the price. Rules are something I follow without question, not because I'm trying to be perfect, but because it makes sense to me. Someone gives you instructions. You do what they say. Simple. I didn't know I was autistic back then, so I didn't understand why I saw the world this way. Everything had clear rules, and I thought everyone followed them the same way. Senior year of high school was pretty much set. I knew which college I was going to, had my friends, and was just waiting for graduation. My schedule was full of advanced classes because chemistry was my thing, and I wanted to get into a good program. That's why I signed up for AP Psychology. It seemed like an easy break from all the science stuff, and people said it was interesting. My teacher was young and excited about everything. This was her first year teaching AP Psychology, and you could tell she wanted to make the class good. Most of the year was great. We learned about theories, did experiments, and talked about how the brain works. I ended up liking it way more than I thought I would. Then May came around right after we took the AP exam. Everyone was tired and ready to be done. My teacher told us we were going to watch a movie and just relax. We were all happy about that. No more studying, no more stress, just coasting until we graduated. She put on Inside Out. I'd already seen it, but didn't mind watching it again. It's a good movie about emotions and memory and all that psychology stuff we've been learning about. We all got comfortable with snacks and enjoyed not taking notes for once, but right at the end of the movie she hit us with it. We weren't just watching for fun. There was a project. We had to write about and draw our core memories. She wanted our best memory and our worst memory. Details and drawings for both. I felt my stomach drop. My best memory was easy. The day my little sister was born and how excited I was to meet her. That was fine. But my worst memory, that was completely different. A year before, something really bad happened to me. Someone I trusted assaulted me, and I was still dealing with it. I hadn't even told most of my friends. Writing it down for a grade and giving it to my teacher made me feel sick. When class ended, I went up to her desk. I asked if I could write about 2 good memories instead, because I didn't feel comfortable writing about my worst one. She said she understood it might be uncomfortable, but the assignment needed our best and our worst. It was important for understanding how core memories shape us. I asked what if the worst memory was really personal. She said I didn't have to share every detail, just enough to show the concept. She smiled like everything was fine, and I left feeling annoyed. She wasn't going to change her mind, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me knew I should talk to my guidance counselor or the department head about how wrong this assignment was. But it was late May. College was already set. I was supposed to be hanging out with my friends, not arguing with teachers. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at blank paper. I thought about making something up, writing about some small bad memory like losing a game or failing a test, but that felt like lying, and my brain doesn't work that way. She wanted my worst memory, so that's what the assignment asked for. I decided to take the easy way out. I give her exactly what she wanted. I spent hours on it. I wrote about meeting my baby sister for the first time, how tiny she was, and how I promised to protect her. I drew little pictures of us together. Then I wrote about what happened to me the year before. I didn't put in all the details, but I was honest. I wrote about how it made me feel, how it changed me, how I thought about it every day. I drew pictures that showed the emotions without being too clear. The whole time I kept it hidden in my folder. Didn't show anyone. On the day it was due, I waited until the very last second before class ended to hand it in. She wouldn't have time to look at it and tell me to change it. I'd done everything on her rubric, every single thing she asked for. The next week felt strange. I kept thinking she'd call me to the office or pull me aside. Nothing happened. Then a week after I turned it in, she gave back our assignments. Mine had 3 words written in red pen that said she was sorry. Below that, a perfect 100% circled. I looked around as other students got their papers back. Everyone seemed happy. At lunch, I asked some classmates what they got. They all said 100. Every single person in class got a perfect score. The next day, my teacher stood at the front of the room looking uncomfortable. She said she wanted to apologize about the core memories assignment. After reading what we wrote, she realized it was wrong to make us share our worst memories. It was personal, and she should have let us write about several good memories if we wanted. She looked right at me when she said if anyone wanted to talk to her privately about anything, her door was open. I didn't take her up on it. She seemed like a nice person, and I could tell she felt terrible. I actually felt kind of bad for putting her in that situation, even though she made the assignment. Years later, my little sister took AP Psychology with the same teacher. She came home one day talking about how they watched Inside Out after the exam. She said they had to do a project about core memories, but the teacher told them they could pick any memories they wanted. They didn't have to do good and bad if they didn't want to. I asked what she was going to write about. She said just happy ones. And why would anyone want to write about bad stuff for a school project? I smiled and said that sounded like a good plan. At least something good came out of what I did. Future students wouldn't have to make the same choice I did. I've been handling homework duty for my 6-year-old for about a year now, ever since I started working from home 3 days a week. My wife takes care of the morning chaos and gets both our boys ready for school, but the afternoon battle with homework falls on me. It's a fair trade-off, and most days it works out fine. Most days, my older son is sharp. Too sharp sometimes. He picked up reading early, solves math problems that would have stumped me at his age, and remembers every detail of conversations from weeks ago, especially the ones where I might have promised something or made some kind of deal. The kid's memory works like a steel trap, but only for things that benefit him. The one subject he hates is writing, not reading. He'll devour chapter books in a single sitting, but ask him to write something down, and you'd think I was asking him to climb Mount Everest in his pajamas. Every afternoon turns into a battle. He'll suddenly need water, then a snack, then he has to use the bathroom, then his pencil isn't sharp enough, then the eraser smells weird. I've heard every excuse in the book. Last Tuesday was rough. I had back-to-back video calls that ran late, and by the time I finished, it was already past 4. My younger son was happily building some kind of spaceship out of blocks in the living room, but my older one was at the kitchen table with his homework folder still zipped shut. I told him we needed to get started so he'd have time to play before dinner. He immediately claimed he wasn't feeling well. I reminded him that he'd felt good enough to ask for cookies just 20 minutes earlier. He insisted that his stomach had started hurting after that. I told him his stomach was fine and to open the folder. He dragged the folder toward him like it weighed 100 pounds and unzipped it with the speed of a sloth on sedatives. Inside was a worksheet with 10 vocabulary words from his reading lesson. The instructions were simple enough. Write each word 3 times. 30 words total. For most kids, maybe 15 minutes of work. For my son, it might as well have been a dissertation. He complained that the assignment was too much and that his hand already hurt. I pointed out that he hadn't written anything yet. He explained that his hand hurt from thinking about writing. I pinched the bridge of my nose. My wife makes this look so easy. She's got the patience of a saint. Me? I was already running on fumes and we hadn't even started yet. The next 20 minutes were torture. He wrote 1 word so slowly I could have cooked dinner in the time it took him to form the letters. He kept sighing dramatically. He switched pencils 4 times. He asked if he could use pen instead, then marker, then crayon. I said no to all of it. I told him that if he spent half as much energy doing the work as he did trying to get out of it, he'd be done already. He simply said that he didn't want to do it. I explained that nobody wants to do homework, and that's why it's called homework and not fun work. He didn't laugh. He just slumped further down in his chair and stared at the paper like it had personally offended him. I looked at the clock. My younger son would need attention soon, and I still had emails to answer before I could call it a day. I needed to speed this along somehow. That's when I made the mistake that would come back to haunt me. I offered him a new deal. I told him to write 10 letters and he could be done for the day. I meant to say write 10 words. That's what I meant in my head. 10 words from the list, and we'd call it good enough for today. We could tackle the rest tomorrow, but what came out of my mouth was 10 letters, and my son's eyes lit up like I'd just told him Christmas came early. He asked me to confirm that I really meant 10 letters. I said yes, 10 letters, and he'd be done. I turned away to grab my phone, already mentally moving on to my next task. Behind me, I heard the frantic scribbling of pencil on paper. Actual enthusiasm for homework. I should have known something was wrong right then, but I was just relieved to hear him working. 30 seconds later, he slammed his pencil down and announced that he was finished. He proudly said that he'd written 11 letters, which was even more than I'd asked for. I turned around and looked at his paper. He'd written the first letter of 11 different words from the list, just the first letter. Single letters marching down the left side of the page in a neat little column. I asked him what he'd done. He explained that he'd written 11 letters, just like I'd asked. I'd said to write 10 letters, and he could be done, so he wrote 11. That was even more than I'd requested. The pride on his face was unmistakable. He knew exactly what he'd done. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the same look he gets when he's solved a tricky math problem. I tried to correct him, explaining that I'd meant write 10 words, and that he needed to write the full words. He countered that this wasn't what I'd said. I'd said 10 letters, and he'd written 11 letters. He'd followed my directions exactly. I insisted that he knew what I'd meant. He threw my own advice back at me, pointing out that I always tell him he has to say what he means. You have to be clear with your words. I'd told him 100 times before. Well, now he was holding me to the same standard. And there it was, my own parenting advice weaponized against me. I stood there with my mouth half open trying to figure out how to argue with logic that was technically sound even though it was absolutely wrong in spirit. I told him he needed to write the actual words. All of them. He politely declined, stating that he'd completed his assignment. 11 letters. I'd said he could be done after 10, so he was finished. Before I could respond, he slid off his chair and headed straight for the living room where his brother was still building. Within seconds, they were both laughing and crashing blocks together. I stood in the kitchen staring at a paper with 11 single letters on it. Part of me was impressed. The kid had found a loophole and exploited it without hesitation. That takes a certain kind of intelligence. A devious, frustrating kind of intelligence, but intelligence nonetheless. Another part of me was disappointed in myself for being so sloppy with my words. I handed him that victory on a silver platter. But mostly, I realized I created a monster. This wasn't going to be the last time he pulled something like this. If anything, I'd just shown him that finding loopholes works. From the living room, I heard him explaining to his brother exactly how he'd gotten out of homework. His brother was only 4, but he was listening intently, probably taking notes for future use. I looked down at my phone and texted my wife that we needed to talk about her son's homework when she got home. She replied immediately, asking what he'd done now and why he was suddenly her son. I responded that he'd outsmarted me and that I'd explain later. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at those 11 letters. Tomorrow we'd finish the assignment the right way. I'd make sure to use the exact right words with no room for interpretation. I'd be specific and clear and leave no loopholes. But tonight I was just going to accept that my 6-year-old had beaten me at my own game. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.